Hey folks, Simon here from the Velo Performance Podcast. Now this month I've got a really special guest on. Renee McGregor is a sports dietitian who specialises in the female athlete and works with people to overcome eating disorders. One of the things I do here at Velo is make sure that all the information I give out is as evidence-based as possible. So Renee has been on my radar for a very long time. I read a blog by Renee recently all about blood glucose monitors, and it's something that a lot of our members at Velo have asked me about, and I've written a small blog about this too. But actually, the best thing I could have done was get her on the podcast and talk about this very subject. So if you want to know why carbohydrates actually don't make you fat, why blood glucose monitors really potentially could be the most dangerous thing for the nutrition sphere in the long-term future, why calories are not the only thing to be thinking about, and why we just don't need to be fearful about carbohydrates or sugar, and hear her thoughts on what we should be focusing on instead, then this podcast is definitely going to be an eye-opener. So without further ado, let's get into it. Renee, great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you because there's so much information, especially so this podcast will go out in January. So it's a perfect time for people to listen in. And I think the best thing to do is really for you to tell us what you do and what your speciality is, and we can take it from there.
Okay, so I'm Renee McGregor. I'm a sports dietitian. I guess I specialize in performance nutrition, but I really specialize in that niche area of trying to help people that have a complicated relationship with food, body, training, and get them to a place where they can be optimal in their performance, but also have a much better relationship in those areas. I guess that's kind of what I'm best known for. So I'm always trying to keep on top of all the science and call out all the bullshit fundamentally, and basically help people to navigate this crazy space that has become nutrition. And it shouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so we're on the same side, I think, realistic, which is why I reached out to you, because what we do at Velo is we educate and we tell them the science and the understanding about nutritional practices, so basics, and keep that as a founding knowledge. But actually what we really do is teach them about food and feelings and understanding of hunger management and being very relaxed around food and not seeing as certain things. So the way that I coach it is like nothing's off the table unless of course you're allergic to it or it doesn't fit your belief systems. And no diet, unless of course it's not fitting your training, is off the table. But there are certain things we need to educate you that you can do. I think the thing that I wanted to chat to you about more importantly is, I mean, I think it's gathering pace, is that people are still adamant about carbohydrates being really bad for you. And there's a big thing in the marketplace going at the moment, which is all about how we shouldn't push insulin at all high and we should keep that super low at all times if we ever want to lose body weight. What I think a lot of these companies are doing are missing the mark big time in the fact that they're not really talking about health. They're only talking about fat loss and weight loss, and potentially maybe talking about keeping carbohydrates low for health. But there's a big mismatch between what they're trying to sell us and, what's your take on it at the moment? I think ultimately my first thing is a lot of people that I coach when they first come on board are terrified of carbohydrates. So what would be really cool actually would be for you to maybe sort of, because I always talk about this with the guys and girls that I coach, it's like carbohydrates don't actually make you fat. And there's it's quite a mechanism to get it there. So maybe you could go into the details of that so anybody listening go, oh, I get it. I finally get it.
Yeah, sure. I think, this whole demonization of carbohydrate, I had really hoped had left us behind, but sadly not. So I guess the first place to sort of start is looking at what carbohydrate is. And there's obviously two types of carbohydrate. You have your kind of complex carbohydrates, which are a structure, and hence they take a little bit longer to break down in the body, but they do break down to glucose. And then you have your more kind of simple carbohydrates, which is fundamentally different types of sugar, whether that's fructose, whether that's sucrose, whether that's glucose, whatever form it is. And these are much more quickly digested by the body and turned into glucose. And the reason why the human body needs glucose is because it is the preferred currency of energy, particularly for the brain. So the brain really likes glucose. And actually, we have seen on many MRI scans and in studies that if you don't have enough glucose in it, then a lot of the pathways and sort of processes that occur in the brain can't happen as effectively and as efficiently. It's also why when you are hungry and your blood glucose is dropping, you find it so difficult to make sense and you get a bit irrational and maybe you can't even concentrate or even think of the word that you're trying to find because the brain can't work as effectively. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that the human body prefers glucose as its energy source. So it can get energy from other sources, but it prefers glucose because it's easy. So where carbohydrates start getting a bad press is that it can be very easy to over-consume those simple carbs. So the example I tend to give people is if we think about a bag of jelly babies that we might pick up when we're on a trip somewhere. A bag of jelly babies, family bag of jelly babies, will contain 152 grams of carbohydrate. That's quite a lot of carbohydrate to consume in one go, depending on your size of carbohydrate. It would be the equivalent of trying to eat three large baked potatoes. So if you think about it, if you're trying to sit there and eat three large baked potatoes, you're going to struggle, right? So the reason why this started to kind of get confused is that people just started to use the term carbohydrate, and then that created fear to eat bread and fear to eat pasta and fear to eat potatoes. And yet these foods are really important in our diet because not only do they provide us with energy and carbohydrate, but they also provide us cases with fiber, which is important for our gut biome. So yes, it is easy to overconsume easily digestible carbohydrates like sugar. But that also doesn't mean you should never have those either. It's just about being mindful of when you use them. So in sport, there are going to be definite times when easily digestible carbohydrates are more important. So, in just before a session, during an endurance session, to maintain that kind of carbohydrate intake so that you can maintain your pace, it's going to be important. But also in the immediate aftermath of a session, because actually, believe it or not, what you are trying to do is get insulin to rise at that point. So when we exercise, we actually sort of reduce our production of insulin, which is kind of normal. And then when you have finished exercising, what you're trying to do is recover and get energy back into the body as quickly as possible. And insulin has also had a really bad press. And insulin is a hormone that helps us to absorb nutrients, and not just glucose, by the way. It actually also is important for the absorption of protein and of fat to a certain degree as well. So if you are obsessed with protein, then you're only going to absorb the protein properly if you've actually allowed insulin to rise as well. So what I think has happened here, as with everything to do with nutrition, is that the information has been taken on board by someone with no scientific brain, with no qualifications in nutrition or science, or really truly understanding how the human body works, appreciating the complexity of the human body. And they have dumbed it right down and basically said, if you eat carbs, you'll put weight on. And it doesn't work like that. So when we consume, let's say we have our porridge for breakfast, what happens is our body absorbs the porridge for breakfast, it breaks it down into glucose, it stores what it can into our glycogen stores in our muscles, in our liver, and in our brain. And then whatever is maybe left over will be carried around in our bloodstream and used up for our daily movement during that time. And that can be used up fairly quickly. Like, as soon as you start walking, you're using energy. As soon as you're standing up, you're using energy fundamentally. It's only really when you're asleep, you're still using energy, but maybe not as much, to be fair, right? So it's not like if you eat carbs, you're suddenly going to put weight on. It's the sort of the age old, if you consume anything to excess of your overall needs, then over time, and I really want to stress that, it's not even in a day, it's not even in a week, we're talking about over a longer period of time, 10 days, 2 weeks, probably more like a month. If you don't get that overall balance correct, then yes, you start noticing that you put weight on potentially. But again, it's not even that is, I've simplified it down to kind of help people to understand. But fundamentally, we are not just energy in, energy out, because there's so many complex reactions that are going on in our body that need energy that actually you don't know how much energy you really need. So even though you might think, oh, well, I haven't done anything today, but so I better not eat carbs, which is a general thing I hear in clinic all the time. Yeah, but you did train yesterday and your body is still recovering from that, and it needs the carbohydrate to, produce red blood cells. It needs the carbohydrate to bone health. It needs the carbohydrate to make sure that your hormones are working for you. Like, it's not just we need carbs when we move. We actually need good nutrition every day, throughout the day, to make sure that we can operate properly. It's just that we've become so fearful of, I suppose, weight is probably the best way to describe it. We've become so fearful of being overweight or becoming obese because we hear it all the time. That's all the media talks about is, the strain that people who are overweight and obese put on the NHS, the increase in prevalence of disease. And again, even that, yes, there is absolutely some truth in that, but also something like obesity in particular is a really complex endocrine condition. It's not just somebody who doesn't have control and doesn't know when to stop. It's complicated. And so I guess, yeah, it winds me up chronic, but carbs are really not the enemy. And they are so important for your brain, for your central nervous system, and also for your hormonal system. And if you want to perform well, you need all those three things to work well for you. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere.
So look, I am I've taught it wrong, but with the people that I work with, I'm always saying, especially because a lot of the people that I work with are over 40 and they're doing long distance training, etc. And I keep saying to them, say, look, protein's important because you need to hold on to lean muscle mass, especially as you get older. And carbohydrates are important because they're muscle sparing. They allow you to hold on to more muscle, but they give you more energy. And as long as you've got a mindset on your calories and you're thinking about what your daily needs are, you're going to be all right. It's, calories are important. They're a good roadmap to work off. And it's the people that when they first start with me, they eat a very small amount of carbohydrates and really not really focusing on that aspect. So they're petrified of sticking more in because they're like, well, what happens if this happens? Well, look, calories are a guideline. Your macro can help you power your performance. They're also going to help you look leaner in the long run. From what I understand, a higher carbohydrate diet within your calorie guidelines and equated high protein diet helps you look leaner, but also perform better and recover better. And it's like, well, who doesn't want that? Especially when we're training hard and consistently over time. You made a really good point, and some people are terrible for this. In their quieter days of training, they literally pull right back on their nutrition, which is something I say, don't do that. Just don't, because as recovery, your body needs to adapt to the training you've just thrown at it and get ready physically to be able to do more later on. Putting nothing in the tank is going to give not much in return. So it's such a good thing. Have I got that right in that way of thinking?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I'm not a big fan of calories because I think, again, I just don't like people to get obsessive about the in and out, because I actually think it's very, very difficult for anybody to work out how many calories they are expending on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Even if you were sat in a lab doing the kind of lab testing, even there's not real life. So you're not really testing what the reality is, and things affect our expenditure. Like, for example, if it's freezing cold, it affects our expenditure. If it's boiling hot, it impacts our expenditure. If you are unwell, it will affect our expenditure. So I think it's really important to kind of be mindful, absolutely, in what you're saying, but understand that it's very, very difficult to know. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many calories I utilize on a daily basis, and also that it varies depending on how many times I go up and down the stairs, or how many times I walk the dog, or, and that's, I even think about my training. So I think, what we do know from physiological studies is that the human body is biologically biased towards energy balance. It likes to achieve energy balance. So it will always work towards that, which means that if on the odd day you might consume a bit more than your body needs in that day, actually what you'll find is that the body switches on behaviors to support that. So your metabolic rate will rise a little bit more. You probably become a little bit more fidgety than you even realize. Suddenly you might have that rush of energy to do the house. Like, these are the things that you're not thinking about, but your body is helping you to maintain energy balance. And similarly, when you don't consume enough, it will go into more preservation sort of processes. And also, this is where it can become problematic if that's a chronic issue. It then starts to shut the body down. But in the day to day, like, I definitely notice if I've had a day where, like, I was in London on Tuesday for work, and I always find it really difficult when I'm working and traveling to keep on top of my intake, just because of the nature of rushing around, trying to find, and what often happens is I notice I got to Euston Station, like, it was like whatever time it was, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, can't remember now, and I was frozen. And I know that was not because it was cold outside, it was because I needed food. Like, my body was telling me that you haven't given it enough today, Renee, you need to get some food into you. And it's those little things that you start to pick up on and notice. And I think, one of the things I'm always trying to teach people is, I know there's a lot of tech out there. I get that there's a lot of tech out there, and I get that we're all becoming consumers of that tech and data, and I get that, and I know really geek out on it, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I think the thing to remember is the human body is designed to have its own monitoring system. It's constantly monitoring what is going on. The hypothalamus, which is obviously the boss of the brain, is constantly checking, is the temperature okay? Have I got enough carbohydrate? Have I got enough iron? Like, it's constantly working it out. It's never switching off. And so I think it's important. I'm always guided by my body. If my body is telling me it's hungry, even if I've just had a massive meal, I'm like, okay, well, I'm obviously still hungry. I'm obviously in need of it. If I'm desiring something maybe a little bit sweeter, I will question, did I eat enough carbohydrate in my last meal? Is that why I'm wanting something sugary? Because again, it's just the brain, the body trying to tell you something, like, I need glucose now, I need sugar now. So I think I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think we just have to be really mindful that it's very, very hard. And our watches that tell us we've burnt X amount of calories, that they are completely pointless and useless from that point of view. Like, they are not accurate in any form or manner. So
yeah,
it's
that's
just
something I spoke to about the guys I was coaching the other day. I was like, you cannot trust these things. I totally agree. I'm with you, and what you've just said, actually, I'll go back and I'll let that digest a little bit more, because maybe with the practice that we run, it's like the calories are a guideline, but you're right. It's that understanding, and it's something I do teach them. So look, if you're hungry, there's a reason why you need to be mindful and really think about it, rather, because most people aren't mindful about food; they just chuck it in. But what I'm trying to do with the people that we coach is get them to be really mindful about what they've been doing over a day, over a week, with their training and with their food, and thinking, look, why am I always a bit empty on the bike, or why am I feeling absolutely ravenous? And once they get a hang of that and their cues and think and asking themselves some really good quality questions, they're going, oh, okay, I need to eat a bit more. Or maybe I need to have a bit more carbohydrate because tomorrow's really tough or very long. And it's like, I need to make sure that that really is quality and I don't ride my bike halfway through and think I need to get off.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point to make because so many people are so fearful of thinking ahead. If I've got a long run, I'll be thinking about that 2 or 3 days beforehand, not just the day before. I'll be thinking about that ahead, thinking about well, Sunday's like a really big run, right? Okay, well, I really need to make sure that sort of Friday, Saturday, I'm eating well to make sure I can I can make that, I can have enough energy to deliver. And that's again something to remember is that our glycogen stores, where we store our carbohydrate, we can store between sort of 500, 600 grams of carbohydrate in there, depending on our size. And like smaller people will be a bit less, bigger people will be a bit more. And while that sounds like a lot, it actually takes quite a long time to for the carbohydrate you consume to be stored as glycogen. So it can take up to 72 hours, which is why, when you're thinking about like marathon training or you're doing your carb loading, that's why we're talking about 4 days beforehand, because we know that if you want full stores on the day of your race, then you need to be thinking about it 3-4 days ahead of that, not the day before, because it's going to be too late. You're never going to be able to get that amount of carbohydrate, like not even, you might be able to consume it, but you won't be able to generate the glycogen for it. So I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that, as you were saying right at the beginning, what you eat today is not going to make a difference today or even tomorrow. Like it's when people, potentially overconsume week after week after week, month after month, that's when the balance will start to shift. And one way to kind of think about this and reassure yourself is that if you look at people, even if you look at people who are overweight, they don't suddenly change in front of your eyes. They don't like go from one week to the next week looking any different. And yet they'll consume in a way maybe that you don't agree with, but they're still not changing in like every day. It takes time. You might notice in 2 months, 3 months time, okay, oh yeah, maybe they have changed a bit more. But that will be, again, they're not mindful and they haven't changed their behavior. So I think if the listeners don't take anything else away except that, what you eat today is not going to affect you immediately, then that's great, because I think that's where people will then panic, because they're like, oh, if I eat all that carbs today, then I'm going to put on weight tomorrow and then I won't be able to ride my bike or whatever it might be. And it's like, no, that will actually help you to ride your bike better, do your run or whatever it is.
That's a beautiful way of describing it, because if we can get across to people that carbs are actually a really good thing for energy creation and delivering in training, then that's a great thing. The thing realistically, which really worries me and is prevalent in the fitness space right now, are blood glucose monitors and that constant bashing of insulin and sugar. What are your thoughts on this? What have you seen and what are you seeing and how's that affecting people right now in your sphere?
So I have spoken openly about this a couple of times now because I am getting really concerned. I've had a number of individuals coming to clinic who have quite frankly become so obsessive about what they're eating as a result of these monitoring tools, should we call them, and they have developed a really dysfunctional relationship with food. And in the females that I've worked with, their periods have stopped as a result of them not consuming enough of the energy and the carbohydrate particularly that they need. So this is problematic on a exponential scale as far as I'm concerned, because you've got sort of company promoting it, you've got celebrities promoting it, you've got potentially well-informed professionals promoting it. And yet, when you actually talk to people in the know, so I've spoken to a number of endocrinologists, I've spoken to a number of scientists, other nutritionists, other dietitians, and everybody, we're all going, oh my God, this is going to be really problematic. So in the past, the only time you would have continuous glucose monitoring would be with somebody who was a type 1 diabetic. Okay, so type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition, and it's where you're born with the fact that your pancreas doesn't produce any insulin. So you can't control your blood sugar levels. So the whole point of the pancreas and insulin is that it's our internal glucose monitoring, if you want to call it that. Like we have that as our internal, and insulin and a well-working pancreas is not problematic. Like, we can eat sugar, we can eat carbs, our blood sugars will go up, but the insulin will be released and they'll come back down again. The reason why insulin has become this fear is because people also associate it with absorbing glucose and then that turning into adipose and then that being problematic from a weight point of view. And again, it's not as simple as that. And I think that's where we get back down to. So, and I think the thing to remember is that in healthy individuals, and I'm talking about individuals when I say healthy, those that don't have type 1 diabetes in particular, their blood sugars will fluctuate a lot during the day. That's normal. You know, if we do my blood sugars every hour on the hour for 2 weeks, we would see huge fluctuations, and that's completely normal. That, you know, yes, our body's very good at controlling it within a certain range, but that doesn't mean it always has to be 4. It doesn't mean it can never be above 6. Like, it is going to continuously, and also that it's not just food that influences our blood sugar, which again is so important to remember. So last month, a couple of months ago now, because we were getting so many people coming through our clinic, a lot of them having signed up to the ZAP, and then they were basically they did their 2 weeks of continuous blood monitoring and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things, and they basically were then told that they should do intermittent fasting and they should do no carbohydrates and all these. And then again, all these women are turning up to us and we've got no period, and it's like, no, wow. Shit, Sherlock. So we decided as a team that we needed to kind of work out what was going on. And so one of my team went undercover and joined the Zoe app to see what the process was and what it involved, because we were getting really worried that, are we missing, or, you know. And she did the 2 weeks of monitoring, and she did it in a controlled way, because we're scientists. She did it in a controlled way. She said, right, she ate exactly the same food every single day, exactly the same for 2 weeks. So if food was the only influence on our blood sugars, then that would mean that her blood sugars should be controlled. And even if they were higher than they should be, they would be the same. That's based on what is being put out there. Her blood sugars were all over the place because it's influenced by stress. It's influenced by dehydration. It's influenced by your sleep to a certain degree. It's influenced poorly. It's influenced in women by their menstrual cycle. Like, that's the thing. And none of these questions are being asked. She didn't get once asked, where are you in your menstrual cycle? Like, didn't get asked any of those questions at all. She just basically got told that her blood sugars were concerning because they were fluctuating so much, and that she needed to talk to one of the advisors about an appropriate approach for her. And when she went to one of these advisors and she challenged them, she asked them things like, well, you know, some of these questions that she put, well, you know, I was in the luteal phase of my menstrual cycle, what influence would that have? No knowledge. She talked to them about the fact that so her sleep was really poor, and that, you know, sometimes it was very, very stressful. No information. She talked about, well, what are the normal variations that you would expect in healthy individuals? No information. So I just want to say that while I think initially the Zoe app was a Zoe study, as you'll probably all remember. It was a Zoe study in the COVID era, we can call that now, I think, where we were all encouraged to put information in every day so they could collect data for COVID to help the research around COVID and what was going on, what the symptoms were. I signed up to it because I was like, well, this is great. And it was research. So, you put your information in, you're collecting all this data. Then suddenly it became the Zoe app. And now people have to pay to be part of this process, and that you're sending all your data in. So that is questionable for a start. Is like, if it's meant to be research and data collection, why are you paying to do it? But also it's become very, very transparent that, Tim Spector, who is behind the Zoe app, this is his business now. He's got a huge amount of investment in it, and he's had to declare that because he was called out on it. Huge amount of, and now he's bringing in individuals like Stephen Bartlett and Davina McCall to market it, and they are also both investors. So just don't be fooled by it. So what they are doing is actually quite unethical because it's not supported by science. Like there are people top endocrinologists who are literally like, this is not okay. This is not science. And as with everything to do with nutrition, he's used two really influential faces to market his product. So of course, people are going to be duped by it. Really, it is something that I feel very, very strongly about and very concerned about, because it is giving false information. It's not even that the information is, just not quite scientific. It's false information, and it's potentially quite harmful. If it starts to affect female menstrual cycles or female hormonal health, that's not okay. And we don't even know for men, right? Because at least with women, we have a sign fairly early on that something's not right with our bodies. But when it comes to men, it takes a while before you can identify that your testosterone level is very, very low. It's not something that you'll not screen normally. So I think we have to be really, really careful. So with the continuous glucose monitoring, the big concern here is that we are scaremongering people and causing dysfunctional behaviors around food because people are trying, as you said right at the beginning, they are trying to keep their numbers to unrealistic targets that don't exist in anyone. And that's the bit that's important.
So, I mean, look, I've been very much aware of this. Obviously, I'm really keen on what's being pumped out, and also a lot I work with ask me these questions. And I think what I find really distasteful about a lot of these companies is they intermix quality science with really bad science. And in my mind, that's the worst kind of advertising for anything, because they're not actually, I don't mind if they get things wrong and then come back and go, we got this wrong, but they don't. And what they're doing is they're making money off the back of it, and they're convincing people that they are worthless, not, all these sort of things, that making them feel that they are inadequate if they're not on these things, and potentially you're ruining your whole life and your long-term health span if you keep your insulin above whatever. And it's like, blimey, this is a horrendous situation to be in. And I know the evidence-based community are sat back thinking, how do we it's almost like this ball is rolling, and I reckon in about a year or so time, we're going to be faced with a bunch of people that know nothing about nutrition, are petrified of eating anything that's got carbohydrate in it, shit scared of the word of insulin, and we're going to be sat there going, oh blimey, where do we start? It's like it's almost like, and I think Martin McDonald said this, we're being pushed back a decade by these people in their understanding of good nutrition, hunger management, everything else that runs along with it. And I think, so one of the guys that I work with, he did the Zoe 2-week sort of trial period. And he was talking about how they were talking about gut biome and the translation into feces. And I'm like, but that's not even backed up by science. The two are very different. They don't even match. And we had a healthy conversation about the subject, but I'm like, this is the problem though. So Zoe says this, and therefore, or whatever company says this, and therefore, they believe it because they bought into it and they don't want to be proven wrong. And it's like, this is worrying, because now we're completely fighting a big fight against. So it feels like Samson and Goliath, right? It's like where do we go? How do we do this?
I think what's really interesting though, like the athletes I've worked with who have been using these tools have actually realized that they're not learning anything new from it. So what I mean by that is like I have a couple of athletes who really like I say I have a lot of athletes I work with, but there are a handful that are quite smart, but yeah, they were offered these products as a like test me, promote me kind of thing. And they were like, really, what do you think? I'm like, I mean, I doubt it's going to teach us anything new, but yeah, why not? We can definitely give it a go. And they used them in races and in training, and we kind of looked at all the data together. And I was like, okay, cool. All this has told me is what physiology tells me, which is when you start running, your blood sugar drops. Or when you basically when you first start running, your blood sugar rises and then it drops because that's what happens. That's normal reaction. That's all it's telling me. And when your blood sugar, so what these monitoring tools do, especially when you're training, is when your blood sugar drops below a certain level, it beeps and it basically encourages you to take fuel on. Now, most of the athletes I work with know when they should take fuel on. They know how much they should take because they've been working with me. So they get this because they were kind of fundamentally already doing what the body is designed to do. I think where maybe if we really are kind of really clutching at straws here, the only time I think it could potentially be helpful is if you have got an athlete who is significantly underfueling all the time, and maybe it might give them insight into the fact that one of the reasons they're not performing well is because their blood sugar is rock bottom the entire time they're training. But I would be concerned about putting anybody who is underfueling on something like this because it will just be something they can get obsessional over. So I think there's an aspect of these. I would like to think that most individuals that would consider using them after even using them, although sadly they have already been kind of conned into purchasing them, so the money's kind of gone. But I think they would potentially start realizing that there's no benefit to this. It's not really helping me to improve my knowledge anymore. But I think where I'm more anxious is in individuals that are panicked by the information that they are getting from it, and then also being advised wrongly into what they should be doing for their overall health. And I don't know what we do, Simon. I genuinely despair, like this area of nutrition that is like, it's the area I've pretty much grown up in from a career point of view. And it just becomes more and more controversial, more and more polarized, and harder to navigate, even as a health professional in it. And I do worry about going, because it doesn't seem to matter how much education you have, what your qualifications are. It all seems to matter on how influential you are and how much noise you can make, which I guess has always been the case. But I think social media has really driven that people are likely to trust those that have got a bigger following than those that have a better understanding of knowledge. And, I did a post a few weeks ago about even people with the right title can't always be trusted, because if they are content creators first, just because doctor in front of their name or whatever, that doesn't mean that they are, doesn't mean they've got a moral compass. Because, fundamentally, in my case, if I didn't have Instagram, it wouldn't make a difference to my career, right? I would continue to get referrals from all the different places I get referrals. I'll continue to do my job. Like way before Instagram, I had a clinic. Like I'm known for my work through my work, and that's where it comes from. So if I didn't have Instagram, it would make very little difference to me fundamentally. But when you see a health professional who has basically built their reputation and their work on their platform, and actually their main job is the content creation, not the working with the people on the ground level, that's where I get worried, because these people are really good at content. Like, that's what they're paid for, and they're really good at it, and they get more and more and more followers because they're really good at it. Like, I know, like, my content's not bad, don't get me wrong. Like, in terms of the information we put out, it's spot on, and it's because I'm so mindful of it, and I have, it helps me to make it look pretty, but I'm not going to spend hours and hours and hours on it, because I have a clinic to run, and I have sports clubs that I work with, and I have books to write, and I have blogs to write. Like, I don't have time. It's not my first job. I do it because I care about the general public, and I worry about the information that's out there, and I want to be the voice of reason. And that's what a lot of people call me on Instagram, is that voice of reason they can go to when they're concerned about something. But I genuinely think we need proper legislation on social media. How you police that, I don't know, because again, like we said, there are people with a doctor in front of their title, but they've never done a day's doctor's work. They've done the degree, but they've never actually worked with actual people in a clinic, or in a whatever. They've never been on the ward or whatever it might be. So I think it is a problematic situation, and I try not to get too bogged down in it, because I think if I do, then I would not get up in the morning. But yeah.
I think from my perspective, what I've done actually over time, and obviously I've studied, but what I do is I basically pull into the people that I know are talking the truth. And they, so even if they've got a doctor in front of them, but I think they're just content creators, I don't follow them. I'm not interested. But there are some really good health professionals out there who've got very good social media presence. And I watch what they talk about, because actually the information they give out is, as far as I'm aware, some of the best knowledge you can see. And that's only a really good thing. They don't have the same followers as, let's say, Davina McCall, for instance, but they're gaining over time, which is fascinating and brilliant all at the same time. I keep thinking, look, keep doing what you're doing, because you're educating people in the right way, and you're this absolute nonsense that you see on social media, and it's chipping away at the bad information. But yeah, you're right. I mean, look, I've got YouTube and social media, and I'm pretty prevalent on it. And I see regularly, daily, some really horrendous information. And I'll be honest, I don't have the energy all the time, because like you, I'm coaching. But I have the energy all the time to drop in and go, that's the most horrendous information I've ever seen. Because I know I'm just going to get absolutely trolled to bits. I don't have the time to manage it, delete it, all that stuff. And it's like, oh, the only thing I can do is, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, is learn it and deliver it. People can understand and learn in a way that they can go, actually, I could put that into practice. That's pretty straightforward. It's just, the problem is, it's not that sexy.
And I mean, that's always been the problem. Like, nutrition isn't meant to be sexy. Like, when you talk about eating in moderation, which is kind of what we're talking about, we're not saying you can't eat, that we're not saying there's no food you can't eat ever. We're just saying that certain foods you need to be a little bit more mindful of. But even then, that depends on your lifestyle. If you are doing 20, I don't know, 12, 15, 20 hours of training a week, then you're going to need to actually ignore the public health messages, and actually probably consume more of the foods that you're probably avoiding, because that's an easy way to get the energy in that your body needs. But yeah, if you are sat at your desk day in, day out, and you don't do any form of formal exercise, you don't even walk a dog, or you don't even walk around the block, then you probably do need to be a bit more mindful about the amount of sugar you eat, or the amount of energy you consume generally. And that's the reality of it. There's no other way of kind of explaining it. But it's not sexy. It's not particularly, people want quick fixes. And again, with the rise of social media, everybody people have become really dependent on free information. And two, people have become accustomed to instant gratification. I want to feel better now, not I'm going to do this process and see where I get to in 3 months' time. It's I want to feel better now. And it's like, well, that's not going to happen because we can't always feel better. And it is really difficult. God, I really wish social media had never been like never ever turned up on our doorsteps. Like I think most people who know me know that I have a real love-hate relationship for it. It genuinely causes most of the problems in today's society, and especially when it comes to mental health. And I wish it had never been invented, personally.
So look, I agree and disagree. I see the good and the bad of it. I think there's as I say, there's a bunch of people out there who are really trying to do the best that they can to give good quality, straightforward, educational, fun information. And there's a lot of people who are taking the mickey out of it and just don't care. And I think we have our own responsibility to take a step back and ask ourselves, is that true? And I think a lot of people don't. As you say, a lot of people are very, especially now, I see it less luckily with the cohort of people I coach. They're all about 40 onwards. So they're not expecting to start a training plan and instantly be the fastest person going up a hill
Yeah.
on a bike. They know it takes time. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. There is that, and I would be a liar to say that even at my age, so I'm 53, and I look, you look at social media and you think, blimey, these 53-year-olds are in great shape. And you're like, yeah, what the hell are they taking to look like that?
Well, I think this is it. Maybe you just get cynical as you get older. I don't know, but I definitely get cynical more and more, and I feel really bad. Like I've got a nearly 21-year-old, and she is, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about what she's going to change in the world. Like she's doing politics and social policy at university and wants to go into social policy. And part of me is like, yeah, good on you. And the other part of me is like, oh my God, like give it another 20 years and you're going to be like me, just really cynical about the whole thing. So, but obviously I'm going to encourage her. But yeah,
So
it's a
look,
difficult one.
I think the thing is, let's wrap up and just say, with the reason why to get you on here was to have a solid sounding reason as to, information that I see flying around at the moment about carbohydrates and insulin and things like that. If we were to wrap up, I think the thing that you've been saying right along the lines is like, you don't need to worry about this. Everybody fluxes day to day on their energy intake and outtake and output. And you really need to be mindful about what you're eating. So how would you leave the conversation so people listening in will go, yeah, I get it. I understand what she's trying to say.
I think what I'd say is, and nobody's going to like this, but I would say trust your body. Like the human body is designed to tell you what it needs when you need it. And I just think, unfortunately, the more we become obsessed with external cues, we stop listening to our internal cues. And, the human body knows how to cope with blood glucose. The human body knows how to cope with a little bit extra energy on a potentially, every now and again basis. Like it's about being able to trust it and not feel like you have to control it. I think that's probably a big thing, is that everybody's trying to control their body. And if you just allow it to be, it pretty much works really well for you and does what it needs to do. And if you look around you and you see individuals that you kind of envy because you think, well, they eat whatever they want and they're fine, like they never have to worry about it. It's probably because they don't try and control. They allow their body to call the control, I guess. Like when you are in control, you have choice. And I don't think people are allowing their bodies to have choice fundamentally.
It's interesting, isn't it? That's a cool way to finish off. Look, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I know this podcast will be really well received because a lot of people listening and this, as I say, goes out in January. And people will be like, well, how do I diet? And I'm like, well, listen to this first and then go away and start becoming a bit more mindful of hunger cues and what you're eating and just maybe engage a bit more and be a bit kinder to yourself, right?
And
So many people aren't.
I think understand that most of our behavior is usually about protection. So if you are noticing, like you said, like be mindful of your behaviors and become aware of them. And if you are eating every hour on the hour, yeah, okay, that probably isn't great. And it's like, okay, why am I doing this? Go a bit deeper. Ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of this? What am I trying to avoid feeling? Or what am I trying to, gain from this? That's how you change your relationship with food, is understanding the behavior associated with what you're doing and trying to work out what is it doing for you, what is the purpose of that behavior. I think that's a really, rather than trying to go, right, I'm just going to restrict, or I'm going to do fasting, whatever it is, understand you and your relationship with food.
I think we're both on the same lines on that. It's like, really, really sort of like take a moment to think about what you're doing and be present in your own head and in your own decision. Go, oh, I'm going to eat that anyway. That's fine. It's not a problem. And having that attitude is quite cool, because it's like, well, I really fancy a biscuit, so I'm going to have one. It's not a problem. But it's like mindlessly eating all the biscuit. Go, oh, I've just eaten the whole packet. Why have I done that? It's like, so not a lot of people think that way, I think. That's maybe that's another thing to talk about, and another time we get you on the podcast and chat about. Maybe if you have time, come back and talk to us about food and feelings and hunger cues and stuff, because that would be cool, really cool.
Yeah, very happy
I've
to.
taken up enough of your time anyway. Thank you so much indeed. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have a really good Christmas.
Thank you.
And this will come out on the 12th of January, because they always come out once a month. And I'll ping a message once it's out.
Brilliant. That sounds to have a great Christmas and a restful one, I hope. And yeah, I will look forward to the episode.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I certainly was writing down a few notes while Renee was chatting to me. Do me a great favour, will you? I think the information that Renee's come out with and the conversation that we've had will help a lot of people understand nutrition better and help them navigate this crazy conversation right now about carbohydrates, insulins, and sugars. So if you found this helpful and you know other people will, send them a link to this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, send them a link to this. But also, please, look, hit like, write some comments in there, give us a chance to get our good message out, that what we're trying to do is give great information and help people understand the nutrition sphere a lot better. And listen, thank you very much for watching, and I will be back next month.